Good morning. It's been a couple of weeks. Anyway, Challengers, I think at 1,800 miles, everything's fine, and I'm just really enjoying it. I've added two more layers of security defenses to it, one of which is kind of my own trade secret, but suffice to say it completely shuts down all engine management, crank request, ignition request. Basically, the network goes completely dead, along with the fact that it's immobilized. So somebody has to really work hard to get it. And if they want to work that hard to get it, well, you know what they say about somebody might need it more than me. Well, we're going to talk about another car here, and it is this beautiful Survivor, all original, 1988 Cadillac Eldorado Baritz. I got this car, it's about a couple of years ago. It's a one-owner car, and it was bought at Marvin K. Brown Cadillac, which is still around in San Diego. And this car is lacking two options. It is lacking the Astro roof, which was Cadillac's term for essentially the tinted mechanical sunroof that would slide back. It's also doesn't have the optional cell phone. That's right. You can actually get this car with the optional cell phone, and this would have been the storage compartment for it. As it is, it's a storage compartment for, you guessed it, cassette tapes. So, but what you're seeing, this car, believe it or not, has 99,000 miles on it, and it's just in marvelous shape. I could tell right away when I looked at it, especially considering the condition of the original Halo elk grain padded vinyl top, the paint, and the trim, that it was not only garaged, this car was kept away from UV. I mean, it's very clear because when I looked at it for the first time, I was pretty sure that it, had been repainted. But then I looked and I said, my God, the VIN tags are on all the parts. There's no overspray. It's just this beautiful original Survivor. So a few things I did to it, pardon me. A few things I did to it was Uniroyal's still around, I think just as a brand, and they still make their Tiger Paw. So I believe it was the Royal Seal. Uniroyal was the factory tire on this thing. It was a very early self-sealing radial tire. So I found some Tiger Paws. I went with 70 wides. This is actually a 75 wide 14 originally, but I went with a 215/70, so it's slightly wider, and it looks a bit more appropriate for a car of this stature. Under the hood, we'll see a 4.5 liter Cadillac V8 engine. This car, or the engine series, and it's a transverse setup, so it's obviously front wheel drive. In 1982, Cadillac rolled out a very revolutionary, very high-tech, very unconventional series of V8 engines known as the high-tech series. And the first incarnation of that was a 4.1 liter or HT 4100 V8. It was very, very much like this engine here. So, architecture. It has a aluminum block, and the cylinders are wet, meaning that the individual steel cylinders are placed in. They're templated in place, and then conventional cast iron heads are bolted down. We have a kind of like the Ford FE engines, where the intake kind of intrudes into about the first quarter of the footprint of the rocker cover. So we have a stamped steel oil sump, a cast aluminum block, steel sleeves, cast iron heads, aluminum intake. I don't think I need to go much further as to what Cadillac was setting itself up for as far as problems. But let me be quite clear. The engine design was very sound. It really wasn't a whole lot there that was cutting edge, with the exception of the fuel injection system and engine management, which is what I would term as very early proto-AI driven. And this car does have a network and does have modules, and they do have a degree of AI in their functionality. I'll get to that a little bit later. But as far as the engine is concerned, the 4100 was intended to go into Cadillac's first generation downsized DeVille series, which was a transverse V8 using the 440 T4 automatic overdrive transmission with lockup converter. Now the Cadillacs had a fluid lockup, whereas the other lines, Buick, etc., and Oldsmobile, actually had a mechanical lockup. And it was a weird transmission because when you tipped out of the throttle, the converter would unlock. And then when you tip back in, it would lock up. So it was like, and it was weird. But this one, because it's a fluid coupling, is seamless. By the time 1988 came around, so the 440 T4 was rolled out in 84 and had problems. But by the time you got to 88, it was pretty well ironed out. But back to the engine. The front-wheel drives were not ready yet, primarily because Hydromatic hadn't ironed out and finished the R&D and perfected, or at least made the 440 T4 ready. And so you had the big rear-wheel drives, the big DeVilles and the big Fleetwoods, at 4,300 plus pounds in 1982, getting the HT4100, which developed, I think, like only 125 horse and like 180 pounds-feet of torque. It was a slug. So they had problems with sealing. They had problems with head bolts, basically. So the head bolt, if you can take the tubular header off, you'd see a head bolt, external head bolt, passing through the head and then reappearing again and then going down into the bed plate. And basically the aluminum threads down there, the head bolts would just pull off. But it was a perfect storm because you had this terribly underpowered engine and these big Cadillacs, and you had to just flog it to get the thing moving. So it just, it was under a tremendous amount of pressure and stress from the get-go. But by 1985, they had improved the 4100, and we had the new DeVille series, which is what it was originally intended for. So by 85, the 4100 was a pretty good engine, and it continued on. They downsized the Eldorado and the Seville very radically in 1986 to essentially the form you see here. And sales absolutely just crashed for both of those cars, because if you park this car next to, say, a Pontiac Sunbird, they kind of looked alike. Although architecturally, there's nothing in common, not much in common. And the 4100 did okay in these things too. 1988 comes along, they realize we've got to do something about the Eldorado and Seville, and so what they do is they stretch the car, I think by 8 inches. They pinch the fenders a la 79 to 85 Eldorado, and the Baritzas, they add this big chrome spear that wraps around the top, a halo vinyl top, raised the rear fenders, and gave it Cadillac wings again. So in 1988, the Eldorado's sales like tripled and basically kind of held steady until the 1992 restyling. But this car is actually very, I guess from a technology standpoint, it shares a lot with this one, because in 1986, when the new DeVille, or the new Eldorado and the Seville were rolled out, they had very advanced tech. Now, the Eldo was the most conservative of them because that tended to be the demographic that purchased them. But even more so was the stablemates would have been the Olds Tornado, then the Tornado Trofeo, which was like a very high-line Olds Tornado, and the Buick Riviera. Would you believe that they offered a very early touchscreen? It was revolutionary. But in order to manage these very high technology subsystems, to include a body controller, so you had, very rudimentary telematics in this thing, as well as engine management, we had to begin, or they decided they were going to have to offer networking. So this car is networked. It has a network backbone, and the body controller actually manages your courtesy lights. It manages the security. This has a factory security alarm that works perfectly. It manages, it's going to, we're going to be managing everything through our electronic display. And I'll just give you, so As the network powers up, we get our digital instrumentation. Then we get our climate control system. Then we get basically all of your functions you can monitor from here, to include read and clear codes. You can do that all from here, from the HVAC side of the house. It would be broadcast here. But yeah, so you can go change it to metric. It lets us know that basically all the modules on the network are reporting everything's okay. You know, and fuel used, engine RPM. So engine data, you scroll through here, coolant temp, battery voltage, and so forth. And then we have average econ, instant econ. Obviously, we're not moving, so it's 0. And then the range given, how much fuel we have in the tank. This has a little over a 16-gallon tank, and it will read F for full and then begin to count down accordingly. Then you go back here. What I do is when I store this car, I take the battery out. So I haven't reset all of the vitals here, but it will tell you, you know, the date and the time and the outside temp. And watch this. So when you power it back up, it'll tell you, it's telling me good evening, even though this recording is happening in the morning. This all had to be managed by network. And this car, as well as the Seville and the Olds Tornado and the Buick Riviera had that network. And so that's what really makes this car very interesting. I've always wanted one, and so when this thing popped up on the Facebook Marketplace radar, and I went to look at it, it was over in Havasu City, I realized, okay, and the price the estate was asking for it, because this was an estate sale car with the original window sticker and stuff, and floor. Those are not the original floor mats, but I do have the original ones. I said, yeah, this is well worth it. I trailered it home because the body controller wasn't switching the fan on. So you have two fans. You have a main cooling fan. Then you're going to have a fan that's going to default on along with the main for HVAC purposes and to add additional cooling. There is a controller for the fans that have malfunctioned. Ended up getting actually a remanufactured one. But, you know, even though ram air, you're moving, you know, traffic or accidents happen. So I just went in and trailered it home and liquid glassed it, thoroughly cleaned the leather, went through a systems check. This car, when I got it, had new struts all the way around, but it needed a motor mount and it needed a dog bone up front. So replaced those. The rotors were a little bit warped, so I went ahead and newed up the rotors on it and some good Kevlar pads. You know, wiper blades. There was a cornering lamp bulb that was out. Those things are driven by actually a software component of the body module drives your cornering lamps. It's not a hard connection to your turn signals. So it's those kind of things that really make the car interesting and fun. But one of the key things is in '88 they rolled out the new 4.5 V8, which was a lot more responsive. Had a very significant increase in power and torque. Extremely smooth. In Cadillac tradition, the engines were internally balanced and just velvety smooth, but they also introduced tuned stainless steel headers, which give it a very pleasant exhaust note. I mean, it's nothing, you know, nothing along the benchmarks of this monster here, but if you wanted a very stable, very quiet, I mean, this thing 75, 80, 85 is not a problem with that 4-speed automatic overdrive, and the engine's just so smooth that it's like, all right, however fast you want to go, up till the limiter, which I think is about 110 for this car, is as fast as it will go. One of the other cool things is this car scales at the curb about 3,700 pounds. Now, all of you all know how much these things weigh. Almost 1,000 pounds more. So it just shows to Goya how in the 80s, especially General Motors had determined through some very faulty analysis in the early 80s that by the time 86 came along, the gas was going to be in 1986 money like $7 a gallon. It's like $40 a gallon today. Well, that didn't happen. And so these radically downsized, highly efficient, lightweight Cadillacs just didn't find a home. as far as, your traditional glitzed out, lots of chrome, wire wheel covers, your Barrett's package, which appealed to kind of that demographic at the time of very, upper income, but, I'd say in mid to late 50s into 70s, this was the car for them. In 1988, I believe, you could get an actual Eldorado touring coupe that had 15-inch rims, and I think they were like 205/70 or 65 maybe. I mean, really fat Mustang GT kind of. I think they were like Goodyear Gatorbacks, but the car was blacked out. Had the same powertrain, had a rear stabilizer bar, had different shock and strut valving as well as springs, and so you had a car that actually performed, very competently on the track. Well, I'll say on the test track. But the seats still were not very supportive. So if you go to Motor Week and look at their test of the 85 Touring Coupe as well as the later versions of this in the Touring Coupe, you'll get the necessary feedback. But they were very impressed that Cadillac had kind of turned that corner. But as far as traditional Cadillacs that kind of have that, make that statement of, high dollar and high class, this is one of the last ones. And I thoroughly enjoy the fact that it is almost compact in dimensions. And, it's easy to keep in the garage. I store it, so in the fall and spring it comes out, and I'll drive it some, and then it kind of gets put back away again. But, yeah, it's from an Autotech, from a historical perspective, if you're into that kind of thing with cars, this car is very, it definitely has its place in the watershed moment of engine management and body controllers, and then a network where they can all communicate and do their handshakes and their data transfer. This is one of the very first ones in the United States anyway. All right. Had a little bit of a diagnosis of, it's going to end up being lupus, and I was having trouble, just literally my joints felt like they were freezing up, and I developed a rash, and it was a low-grade fever, and that kind of stuff that I just had no idea until the doc's like, okay, we need to generate some markers on potentially what this is. And it's like diabetes. People live with lupus and continue to lead functional lives. I'm just going to have to make some adjustments and not rely on NSAIDs so much now that I know what's going on. All right. Well, have a great weekend. We're actually having Wheels and Wings up on the airport in Sedona. Some vintage planes, which is really cool. I didn't register in time. Totally slipped my mind to get the Cadillac in the show, but I will next year. I think it's definitely one of those worthy vehicles, especially at 100,000 miles, and it's original, and it's a driver-grade car where all the systems work, and it's just gorgeous. No crashes, no wrecks, no bondos, no rusts, no nothing. So, all right, have a great weekend. Bye-bye.